Okay, so we talked about savings accounts. Checking accounts are different than savings accounts in a couple ways. One, they all pay interest. And the reason they pay interest is because the bank is paying you interest for the use of the money. So when, let's say you go to the bank to get a loan, the bank is able to make you that loan based on the money that other people have on deposit. The bank charges you interest and then pays those people a lower interest rate. So that's how the bank makes money. The bank does not technically have their own money. Banks don't have their own money. Banks have depositors' money. And so that's why they pay interest on a savings account, is because they're using that money that you've deposited to loan it to other people. Now, because of this, there are usually transaction limits. They never limit the amount of money you can put into the account or the number of times you can put money into the account in a month, but they will limit the number of times you can take money out of the account. Some banks, you can only pull money out of your savings account once a month. Some maybe will twice a month. Some have 3 times. It depends on the bank. But the reason for that is because the difference between the savings and the checking account is used to be a fluid account, money in and out, willy-nilly all the time. A savings account is meant to be money that you just put there and you leave it there and don't touch it. Savings are for long term. If you're not using it for a long term, then the bank doesn't have a guaranteed source of money to be loaning to other people. So that's what that's about. The interest is a percentage that's paid on the money in the account, and that is based on the interest rate. Usually it will be quoted as an APR or APY, and we'll go over what those are a little bit later specifically, but that's annual percentage rate or annual percentage yield, and there's a slight difference between them. The amount of money that the interest is calculated on is either the original deposit only or the current account balance. Usually when we're talking principal, we're talking only deposits. So it can be the current account balance minus the interest. And simple interest is calculated on the initial deposit only. So let's say you're depositing $20 in the bank and then you just let it sit there, and every month you earn 5 cents. Well, the first month they're going to calculate your interest on the $20 and you're going to earn 5 cents. So you'll have $20.05. The second month they're going to calculate your interest on that initial $20 and you'll earn another 5 cents. You'll have $20.10. But they don't count that 5 and 10 cents that they're paying you. They don't count any of the money that they pay you when they're calculating your interest. They only count the money that you put in. Does that make sense? First formula we've got is I, that's an I, is equal to PRT. I is the interest. P is the principal. And in this case, it's the initial deposit. This formula does not allow for calculations based on, like, say you deposit $20 every week. You wouldn't be able to factor that in. You'd have to actually do, okay, I deposited $20 this week, I calculate the interest. Okay, next week I have an extra $20, so now I have 40. So now I have to calculate. You'd have to do individual calculations. It won't allow for It won't accept multiple deposits, I guess is what I mean. Uh-huh. You can put extra money, but what happens, they, there's a formula that we're going to do later that is a compound interest formula that if you're going to deposit the same amount every week or month, you will enter that amount. So if it's a $20 deposit, that's the amount you put in, and it actually will account for all of those deposits for you. So you do one calculation and say, okay, in 5 years, how much would I have? And it tells you. With this formula, if you're going to put in $20 a week, you'd have to calculate a new equation every single week to figure out how much in 5 years. So when they do this, what they do is if they're paying simple interest on your account and they pay it monthly, let's say, and you make deposits every week, they're going to do 4 separate calculations to find out how much interest they owe you at the end of the month. So they'll calculate the first week's interest, and then the second week's, and then the third week's, and then the fourth week's. But only based on what money you put in, not based on any interest that you earned during that time. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. It's a very simple formula. It doesn't allow for really kind of any interesting situations. It doesn't allow you to progress out really far without making, well, like I said, if you were doing, like, say, a monthly deposit and you wanted to find out how much you'd have in 5 years, you'd have to do 60 different calculations to get there. So, it's not a really flexible equation, but it is very simple. That's simple interest. Okay. T, time, always has to be in years. So if you're doing an amount that's not an even number of years, you have to do months, the number of months, over 12, if it's not an even number of years. And that's for T, for time, because time always has to be in years for this formula to work. And then the rate is your percentage as a decimal. And if anybody has trouble remembering, if you put a D for decimal and a P for percent alphabetically, to move from a percent to a decimal, you move 2 places from the P to the D, so 2 places to the left. If you're going from a decimal to a percent, you'd come in and move 2 places the other direction. And so it's interesting. I don't think they didn't plan it this way, obviously, but it worked out that it's alphabetical which direction you move. So that kind of can help you remember which way to go. Okay, your savings statement. I don't know why I typed it statement savings. Never mind. Statement savings account is the most common. This is a very basic savings account. Type of account. This statement savings is the most common savings account. If you just go to the bank and you say, I'd like to open a savings account, and you're not specific, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get a monthly statement that outlines any deposits you've made, any withdrawals you've made, and any interest you've earned or any fees. These type of accounts have a lower minimum balance. They have more flexible terms. So you may be allowed to withdraw more often than, say, another type of savings account. And then the fees, if there are any, are lower. Usually, the only time you accumulate a fee in a savings account is if you fall below a minimum balance or if you go over the number of transactions. Savings accounts are meant to earn money, so they don't charge a monthly fee as long as you are falling within their guidelines. They also pay lower interest rates. They are higher than a checking account that pays interest usually, but lower than some of the other types of savings that you can get into. You have your minimum balance, which is the lowest amount balance in the account. And for some banks, you get OR fees, and for other banks, you might not earn interest. So it depends on the bank. Some banks may not charge a fee, but then they won't pay your interest if you're below the minimum balance. Other banks might charge the fee. Some banks might do both. Money market account is a special kind of savings account. Okay, so the money market account pays higher interest than a regular savings account. However, most banks, you can open a savings account with between $25 and $100, a regular savings account. With a money market account, it's going to be $500, $1,000, or more, depending on the bank. So they do have a higher initial deposit to be able to sort of buy into the account. And then they have that higher minimum balance, and that minimum balance is usually the same as the initial deposit. So if you had to have $1,000 to even open the account, you have to keep $1,000 in the account. And then they have more rigid terms. If a regular savings account at a bank will let you make 3 withdrawals in a month, the money market account may only allow you to make 1 withdrawal a month. Or they may only allow you to make 1 withdrawal every so many months. It depends on the bank. Again, there's not some rule that all banks have to follow. So you just have to look into the terms at the individual banks and make your decision based off of that. But they do pay higher interest. CDs are another type of savings account. It's a certificate of deposit, but everybody just calls them CDs. They pay higher interest. Usually it's considerably higher than the savings account, depending on the term of the length of the CD. The shorter the length, the smaller the interest rate. The longer the length, the higher the interest rate. So it'll vary. And they have specific amounts that you have to be able to buy a CD. It could be $50. It could be $1,000. It could be more than that. What happens with a CD is, so let's say I buy a $500 CD, and I buy a 5-year one. What that means is that for 5 years, the bank has access to that $500. That's kind of like their guarantee, that they get to play with that $500 for 5 years. I won't touch it. Now I get a higher interest rate for this, but the idea is that I cannot touch this. If I withdraw early from a CD, if you take money out of a CD early, you pay really high penalties. Usually, so let's say I bought a $500 CD and it'll earn me $200 in interest over that 5 years, so I'll get $700 in that 5 years. If I withdraw early, I may only get back $200 or $300 because my penalties will be so high. Okay, so that's kind of how those work. So they're really good for earning interest and saving money, especially for things that are like long-term goals, like down payment for a house, college funds, things like that. But you have to know that you're not going to need to access that money, because if you do early, you end up losing more than you had put in to begin with. You're not getting back even as much as you had put in to begin with. So the maturity date is the day that you're allowed to withdraw the money, and on that day you can either withdraw it or you can roll it over into a new CD. You have a choice at that point. Usually what happens is if people are doing CDs for like long-term goals, so they buy like a $500 CD, and then at the end of the 5 years they have $700, so then they buy a $700 CD. Like they just roll the interest in so that it builds faster. Or you can withdraw it and put it into a regular account at that time. And that date of maturity, technically speaking, there are CDs that exist that are only for a couple weeks. but you don't really hear about them or see them. I think they're pretty rare. Usually it's years, based on years or months. 6 months to 10 years usually is the range. So it can range from weeks or months or years. And then the amount of the minimum buy-in can vary too from bank to bank. Like I said, if you have like a long-term savings goal and you want sort of maybe like a sort of a nudge not to be able to withdraw the money, you know, so it's like you won't go to the store and be like, oh, those shoes are so cute, I'll just take the money out of savings. CDs are good for that. They pay higher interest and they lock your money away. But if there's a situation where you may need the money sooner, then you want to go with a different kind of like a money market or a regular savings account. That have extraneous information. Grace wants to deposit $5,000 in a certificate of deposit for a period of 2 years. She is computing interest rates quoted by 3 local banks and 1 online bank. Write the interest rates in ascending order and which bank pays the highest interest for this 2-year CD. Okay, here's what I don't need to know. I don't need to know that. I don't need to know that. All I need is this information here. So these kind of things that you don't need to calculate get thrown in here. Don't feel like every number that's in the problem needs to be worked with. Sometimes there's extra information. We don't care that the certificate is $5,000. All we need to know is the interest rates to answer this question. Okay, now I have fractions and decimals. I need to either convert my decimals to fractions and then give them all a common denominator to be able to compare them so that I can write them in ascending order, or I can convert my fractions to decimals and then write them in ascending order. Which would you prefer? Fractions to decimals. Okay, so fraction to decimal, you do the numerator divided by the denominator. Okay, so for First State Bank, I've got that 1/4 is going to be 1 divided by 4. So it's 0.25. And here this 3/8. I'm going to do 3 divided by 8. And surprisingly, I don't actually have that one memorized. It's 375. So First State Bank is 4.25%. And eSafe Bank is 4.375%. Okay, ascending order. Ascending means lowest to highest. Descending would be highest to lowest. So smallest, I've got a 4.25, a 4.22, 4.37, and a 4.3. 22 is the smallest. And then I have 4.25. 4.3 comes with 4.37. Okay, so those are the orders, and the best interest is the highest interest. So she ought to go with eSave because they pay the most. At least $500, or he gets charged a $4 fee. His balance is $716.23 and he withdraws $225. So what is his new balance? I take out that $225. And I now have $491. But he gets charged a $4 fee if he went below $500, which he did. So I take out that fee, and his new balance is $487.23. Any questions about that one? Okay. Mitchell deposits $1,200 in an account that pays 4.5% simple interest, and he keeps the money in the account for 3 years. Okay, so simple interest formula. Okay, $1,200. Oops, that's not $12, $1,200. That's our principal. Okay, that's how much he deposited. 4.5% is our rate, and 3 years is our time. Now, I cannot use this as a percent. I have to convert it to decimal, so I'm going to move 2 places to the left, which makes this 0.045. So far, okay? So my interest is 1,200 times 0.045 times 3. That's my interest. I'm not done though. The question that is being asked, I'll highlight it. How much is in the account after 3 years? I earned interest, but that's not how much is in the account. My balance is equal to the principal plus the interest. So the initial 1,200 plus the 162 is 1,362. That's how much is in his account. So be careful on these that you're actually answering the question that's being asked. So if you got this far, you'd be halfway, so you get half the points. You got to finish it. Or we don't have years, we have months. Okay. So T is 7 months, but it needs to be in terms of years. So remember I said that has to be months over 12 to make it years. So 7 over 12 is going to be my T. My R is 5.2%, which I have to move 2 spaces over. So that makes it 0.052. And my P is 2,000. Okay. Now, there's 2 ways you can do this. Method 1 is you can divide 7 by 12 and get a decimal, which is 0.58 repeating 3's. And then multiply that times 2,000 and times 0.052 and get your answer. Okay, the second way you can do this is you can do 2,000 times 0.052 times 7, get an answer, and then divide that answer by 12. That's what this fractions are division. So you multiply all across the top. If these were like ones underneath, it'd be multiplying across the top and then dividing by the bottom. Or that pops out for no reason. You're going to get the same answer either way. You may lose some accuracy on this one because if you don't keep all the 3's in your calculator and you round it and put in like say 0.583, you'll lose a little accuracy, but not so much that it'll make a big difference, like 1 or 2 cents. So either way works out fine. If I do it the first way, I kept in all the 3's. So I get 60.67. If I do the second way, I get 728, which I divide by 12, and I get the same thing. If I were to round and not keep the 3's, oops, what did I do? Oh, point. I would get 60.63. So it would only be 4 cents off. So you do lose some accuracy, but it's still close enough that it would not be wrong. So either way works fine. Okay, on this one we're trying to find out how much principal. So we know I, we know T, and we know R. We don't know P. So 1,000 is equal to unknown P times R times T. And if I multiply 0.05 times 2, I get 0.1. And I'm just putting the P on the end so it looks like what you guys are used to. And I divide both sides by 0.1. So you'd have to put $10,000 in the bank to earn $1,000 in 2 years at 5% interest. So anytime you're missing one of these, you just plug in the other two, multiply them, put it in front of the missing one, and divide the other side. Okay, here we have interest. We have balance. So that's principal. And we want to know when it'll be 1,000. So we have to find the interest first, and then we have to plug in to find the time. So interest is going to be balance minus principal. We want to know, he has 910, we want to know when it'll be 1,000, so that means, my pen is messing up, he has to earn $90. So my interest is going to be $90. My rate is 0.041, I move that over 2 places, and I don't know T. Divide both sides by 3731. I didn't round that either, that's what it just came out to be. So I'm going to say about 1 year. Right, because it's close to a year, 9.9. Okay, and then here's another one where we have to find the interest again. We're depositing 5,000. We want to know what rate to have $6,000. We have T. My interest is going to be 6,000 minus 5,000. So we want to earn $1,000. So I want to earn $1,000 on $5,000 at some unknown rate after 5 years. 5,005 is 25,000. R. Divide both sides by 25,000. And I'm going to get 0.04, and I want to turn that into a percent. So I move the opposite direction, and I need 4% interest.